They say don't mess with someone who can park on your lawn. But what about someone who can park a 40-foot sailboat in your community pool? I did exactly that, and that's why they call me Captain Chaos around Whispering Pines. This is the story of how my boat, Freedom, the last thing I had after a brutal divorce, was towed away by a power-hungry HOA president without warning, and how I made sure she'd regret that decision for the rest of her life. Right now, I'm recording this from my dock, where Freedom sits safely once again. But 2 months ago, I was staring at an empty driveway and a violation notice duct taped to my mailbox like some kind of ransom demand. What would you do if someone stole the only thing that brought you peace? I didn't just fight back. I made sure the entire neighborhood watched the fireworks. Maybe you wouldn't go so far as parking a yacht in a pool. But not everyone gets the rare privilege of meeting a tyrant like Veronica Klein, the kind of woman who weaponizes rules, ruins reputations, and runs an HOA like a dictatorship. This whole thing started 6 months ago, the day I moved into Whispering Pines Estates. A quiet, orderly community, as the brochure said, more like a Stepford nightmare. I'm Marcus Hayes, 38, remote landscape architect, and at the time, a man just trying to survive the wreckage of a life he didn't see coming. My ex-wife Amanda didn't just cheat on me. She did it with my best friend and business partner, then sued for ownership of both the company and the boat. The only thing I walked away with after years of building a marriage and a business was Freedom, my 22-foot fishing boat. Amanda never even set foot on it, but she fought tooth and nail to claim it out of pure spite. That boat wasn't just fiberglass and varnish. It was the one place I still felt like me. Out there on the water, I could breathe again. We built the original hull, my dad and I, back before his cancer diagnosis. When I sold that one during the recession, I promised myself I'd get another, and I did. Freedom became a floating tribute to peace, patience, and promises kept. So when I scraped together just enough to buy a modest home in Whispering Pines, a place with quiet cul-de-sacs, pristine lawns, and supposedly a reasonable HOA, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could finally rebuild. The realtor smiled wide when I asked about the HOA. Oh, they're mostly just about keeping things tidy. You know, property values. She didn't meet my eyes when she said it. That should have been my first clue. 3 days after I moved in, the Queen herself arrived. It was a Tuesday morning. I was unloading boxes when a long shadow crept across the driveway. I looked up. There she stood, Veronica Klein, HOA president, statuesque, silver-haired, and manicured to the point of menace. She smiled, but the corners of her eyes stayed cold. "Welcome to Whispering Pines," she said, extending a hand tipped with nails like glass daggers. "I'm Veronica Klein. I just wanted to drop off your welcome packet and review a few considerations." Considerations. That word landed like a rock in my gut. What followed was a 30-minute monologue about garbage can alignment, mulch color, regulations, and how many lumens were acceptable for porch lights. I nodded, smiled politely, tried to chalk it up to overzealous community spirit. But something about her voice hit a nerve. The tone, the dismissiveness, the way she assumed authority. It reminded me of Amanda, during the last year of our marriage. The way she talked down to me like I was a tenant in my own life. That night I sat out on my back porch beneath a star-choked sky, asking myself a question I didn't want to face. Did I just escape one prison to walk into another? The answer came the following Saturday, when I brought Freedom home for a weekend wash. The HOA bylaws permitted boats to be parked in driveways for up to 48 hours, for cleaning and maintenance. I planned to have her there from Saturday morning to Sunday night. No rule breaking, no rebellion, just routine. I was polishing the hull when I heard the slow, deliberate click of heels. There she was again, Veronica, clipboard in hand, flanked by her ever-loyal minion, Douglas Fitzgerald, who looked like a man permanently trapped in a bow tie. "Mr. Hayes," she said, rapping her pen against the board, "I noticed you have a watercraft on the premises." I didn't miss the emphasis, like she was accusing me of harboring contraband. "Yes, ma'am," I replied evenly. Well, within the 48-hour window allowed by Section 7, Paragraph 3 of your bylaws. Her smile twitched. We'll see about that. And just like that, she turned on her heel and walked away. That night, a soft knock came at my door. It was my neighbor, Mia Collins, mid-30s, with kind eyes and a nervous glance over her shoulder. She carried a plate of cookies like a peace offering. "I saw Veronica and Douglas out front earlier," she said. "Just be careful. They don't exactly welcome new residents with open arms." We talked on the porch until the stars blinked on. She'd lived here 5 years. A third-grade teacher. Had her own war stories, like being fined hundreds of dollars for planting sunflowers without getting seed variety approval. So why stay? I love my house. The school's nearby. And I keep hoping someone will finally stand up to her. Didn't know it then, but that someone would be me. And Mia, quiet, conflict-averse Mia, would become my fiercest ally. There was something grounding about her. No judgment, no performance. For the first time in months, I felt seen without having to wear a mask. She told me she minored in landscape design. "I've always wanted to create spaces where people feel at peace," she said, eyes lighting up as she described her dream garden. I laughed, a real laugh, not the hollow echo I'd gotten used to forcing, and for a brief moment I believed I might actually be okay. Then the violation started. My grass was 1 4 inch too tall. My mailbox was the wrong shade of black. My garden hose was considered unsightly. Each citation came with a $50 fine. Failure to pay within 48 hours? The fine doubled. When I tried to bring this up during an HOA meeting, Veronica cut me off mid-sentence. "This is not the time for resident grievances," Douglas announced like a bailiff in a courtroom. Later, I received an internal email, accidentally, forwarded by a sympathetic neighbor. It labeled me as a non-compliant problem resident. I was being targeted. I didn't understand why. But every envelope from the HOA triggered that old, familiar dread. I'd flinch, hands shaking, heart racing. It was the same feeling I had during the worst days of the divorce, when Amanda's lawyers called daily with new demands. Maybe I am the problem. Maybe Amanda was right. Maybe I really am just a failure. But then I'd look at photos of freedom in my phone, remember what she stood for. And something would shift inside me, resolve replacing fear. I started documenting everything. Photos of my lawn next to a ruler, date-stamped images of mailbox paint, audio recordings of every interaction. The simple act of resisting, even in small ways, began rebuilding the parts of me that the divorce had fractured. Mia noticed the toll it was taking. "You know," she said one evening on our walk by the lake, "my ex controlled everything too. I wasn't allowed to buy curtains, without permission." She paused. "When I finally left, I swore I'd never let anyone dictate my life again. But Veronica, she's like a new version of the same monster." Her voice didn't tremble. It was steel-wrapped calm. I opened up too. Told her how Amanda convinced me that my passion for landscape architecture was impractical. How she mocked my love of fishing. How she belittled the hours I spent restoring boats with my dad. "She never understood why freedom mattered," I said. "She doesn't have to," Mia whispered. "But Veronica will." Because what happened next? That's when everything exploded, and when the FBI got involved, let's just say Veronica learned the hard way. You don't steal a sailor's boat unless you're ready to lose your own. Outside in my pajamas, I stood motionless, squinting into the darkness, thinking maybe I was seeing things wrong. But no, my boat had vanished. I called the police to report a theft, only to be told it hadn't been stolen. It had been legally towed at the request of the Homeowners Association. When I called the HOA office, a smug-sounding Douglas informed me that I could recover my violation from Bennett Towing and Storage for the tidy sum of $800 plus $750 in accumulated fines. The moment I hung up the phone, I collapsed into a panic attack, the kind I hadn't felt since the days immediately following Amanda's affair. My vision tunneled. My breathing became shallow. I sank to the kitchen floor, unable to stand. For nearly an hour, I sat there paralyzed, overwhelmed by the fear that I might lose freedom, not just the boat, but the one thing that had held me together through the chaos of my divorce. It wasn't just about the money, though that was no small matter. It was about losing the last thing that had helped me maintain my sanity. The thought that Veronica, the same woman who seemed to enjoy kicking people while they were down, might take that from me too was unbearable. But when the panic finally passed, something cold and steady took its place. A new kind of anger. Not hot, reactive rage like I'd felt after discovering Amanda's betrayal, but something sharper, focused, calculated, and, strangely, empowering. I borrowed the money and drove straight to Bennett Towing that afternoon. Wade Parker himself, heavy-set, red-faced and wearing a permanent sneer, met me at the chain-link gate and led me out back. When I saw Freedom, my stomach dropped. There were deep scratches along the hull. One of the trailer wheels was broken, and worst of all, my father's vintage collection of fishing lures, the only thing I had left of him, was missing. "What happened to my gear?" I demanded. Wade shrugged. "Everything was inventoried as found. If something's missing, it wasn't here when we picked it up." A blatant lie. And we both knew it. When I tried to file a complaint with the HOA, Veronica waved it away like I was some annoying fly. "We're not responsible for any damages. If you love that boat so much, perhaps you should find somewhere else to live." Wade added, chuckling. "I was careful as could be. Maybe your boat was already old and weak like your marriage." He smirked knowingly, clearly having been filled in on my personal history by Elaine. Standing there looking at my battered boat and hearing those smug voices, something snapped and reformed inside me. The old Marcus, the one who had let Amanda steamroll him for years, who had quietly given up pieces of himself to keep the peace, was gone. In his place stood someone new, someone who understood that sometimes you have to fight, not just for your property, but for your dignity. I remembered something my father had said once. Integrity doesn't mean avoiding conflict. It means choosing the right battles and standing your ground when it matters. This mattered. As I towed Freedom back to my storage lot, I dialed Lily. My voice must have sounded different because her first words were, "What happened? Are you okay?" When I told her about the boat and my father's missing lures, her usually gentle tone sharpened. "This has gone too far. It's not about rules anymore. They're deliberately trying to hurt you." We agreed to meet that evening, and when I hung up, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't alone. Something hardened in me that night. Freedom had come to symbolize everything I'd fought to keep: my independence, my memories, my sanity. And now they'd violated even that. With a cold determination I hadn't felt since fighting for custody in divorce court, I decided this would be the last time anyone took something from me. If they wanted a war, I'd give them a war they wouldn't forget. I launched my counteroffensive with the same meticulous focus I brought to every project as a landscape architect. I started with research, bylaws, voting histories, financial records, anything I could get my hands on related to Whispering Pines and its HOA. I began attending every HOA meeting, asking pointed questions no one else dared to raise. In the past 3 years, towing expenses have increased over 300%. Could someone explain the bidding process that awarded the contract to Bennett Towing? Veronica stammered. Douglas flushed a deep shade of red. After that meeting, I overheard Veronica muttering to Douglas and Wade, "Keep an eye on that landscape architect. They should have been more careful with who they chose to intimidate." That week, I met Harold Greaves, a retired law professor who'd lived in Whispering Pines for over 25 years. "I was on the HOA board," he said, sipping coffee at a quiet diner. Until Veronica pushed me out. "Why?" I asked. He gave a bitter smile. "Started when her husband died. Left her a fat insurance policy. I think she needed somewhere to feel powerful. Then Harold dropped a bombshell." Wade, Parker pays Veronica a 30% commission from every towing job. It's not in any official records, he continued. But that arrangement is why so many cars and boats disappear around here. Harold pointed me toward Natalie Gomez, the HOA secretary. A single mother of two, scared of losing her job, but clearly uncomfortable with what was going on. After some careful conversations, Natalie agreed to help. She gave me access to internal financial records hidden from regular homeowners. What I found was explosive. In just 3 years, 37 vehicles and boats had been towed, more than a 300% increase. Bennett Towing was being paid 2 to 3 times the market rate. There was no evidence of any competitive bidding process. At this point, Lily and I had begun spending most evenings together. She'd come by after work, bring groceries, help me sift through documents. She'd grade papers at the dining table while I analyzed spreadsheets and bylaws. One evening, as the sun set behind my porch, she confessed something soft but piercing. "Used to have panic attacks too," she said, eyes on the horizon, "after leaving my ex, just like the one you had when your boat was towed." I set aside the papers. "How'd you get through them?" She smiled gently. "I learned to recognize them, to remind myself that feeling trapped isn't the same as being trapped. And eventually, I found things worth fighting for." The next morning, she invited me to coffee near her school. She slid a folder across the table. "I've been watching what they're doing to you," she said. "Thought this might help." Inside were internal community amenity codes, pool regulations, building codes, things she'd accessed through her part-time job at the local property management office. "I have a minor in landscape design," she admitted with a shy smile. "I've always liked community planning, just never had the courage to speak up about it." Over the next few weeks, our relationship deepened. We'd talk late into the night, about the past, about the future. She told me how she was raised, in a family that avoided conflict at all costs. "That's probably why I stayed with my ex too long," she said, "and why I've tolerated Elaine's tyranny." I told her how Amanda had once seemed like an anchor, but turned out to be the weight pulling me under. We shared wounds, and we began to heal them together. One rainy Saturday, we redesigned my backyard, on paper. We planted native plants that grew just under the HOA's height restrictions, a meditation circle with rocks arranged in a way that, viewed from above, spelled out freedom. It was creative rebellion. And it was therapy. That night when thunder rolled, she didn't rush home. We stayed in, made hot chocolate, and kept sketching plans. When our hands brushed while reaching for the same design manual, neither of us pulled away. Then, we found there was a loophole. There were detailed rules banning boats from driveways, streets, and yards, but there was nothing, not a single word, prohibiting watercraft from the community pool. It was absurd, yes, but technically allowed. We stared at each other, then burst into laughter. But underneath the humor, something clicked. "Sometimes," I told Lily, "you need a bigger boat to sink a smaller ship." Meanwhile, Wade must have sensed something was brewing. One evening, as I checked the mailbox, his tow truck crept by. "People have a lot of accidents with boats," he called out. "Trailer hitches fail. Brakes give out. Dangerous hobby." The threat was obvious, but it didn't shake me. It fueled me. The idea that began as a joke had taken root, and over the next 2 weeks, I built it into a full-scale operation, with the same precision I brought to million-dollar design projects. I called it Operation Yacht Drop. At my age, what did I have to lose? That's what Gerald Patterson said when he offered to help, just before he provided critical insights into the HOA's legal vulnerabilities. Natalie, our inside contact, agreed to help too, on one condition: that her involvement remain absolutely secret. She began supplying us with internal documents and tipped us off about Veronica's schedule. Victor Ramirez, a professional tow truck operator, joined after hearing what we were up against. His motive? Personal revenge. Veronica once had his truck towed while he was visiting his brother. Victor was methodical. He identified potential choke points along the route, advised on equipment modifications, and developed a towing plan that factored in the tight turns and narrow residential streets. Gerald, a 68-year-old retired corporate, attorney and amateur photographer, didn't just volunteer to document everything. He also served as our on-site legal counsel. Always wanted to be a photojournalist, he chuckled. Better late than never. More importantly, Gerald helped us prepare legal contingencies, documents asserting our rights under HOA bylaws, statements for possible police interactions, and a clear understanding of what boundaries we could not cross without risking real consequences. We held planning meetings in secret, rotating locations to avoid suspicion, sometimes in my garage with the door down, other times in a coffee shop 2 towns over. We communicated via an encrypted shared document, turning our protest into a precision operation. Every member had clear responsibilities and backup roles. We even ran a 3 a.m. test using a canoe, just to measure HOA security's reaction time and find the fastest pool access points. Lily, to my surprise, became the operation's most passionate strategic planner. She sketched out how we'd decorate the yacht, designed banners, and insisted we display laminated neighborhood maps with the caption, "Nowhere does it say no boats in pool." She also suggested we set up a refreshment station on the deck to attract neighbors. "If we're going to do this," she said, eyes blazing with conviction, "let's make sure everyone sees it." Mia masterminded our social strategy. She created an anonymous email alert, listed which neighbors to notify beforehand, and identified sympathetic reporters. She even drafted a press release framing the stunt as a peaceful act of protest, not rebellion. Still, we faced serious challenges. Timing was everything. We needed enough darkness to operate unseen, but just enough light for Veronica to wake up to her worst nightmare. And moving a 40-foot yacht through suburban streets wasn't just a logistical headache. It was potentially dangerous. Tony brought in 2 experienced handlers to supervise the transport. Victor demanded we use specialized stabilizers and backup safety lines. The operation was becoming expensive. I was already stretched thin financially, but team members quietly contributed what they could. It became a true community effort. 1 week before D-Day, we conducted a full walkthrough, minus the actual yacht. Using tape, cones, and chalk, we mapped the route from the holding site to the pool entrance. Gerald identified a blind spot in the HOA's security camera coverage. Victor adjusted our approach angle by 4 degrees to avoid a storm drain. Mia marked alternate entry routes in case the primary one was blocked. It felt almost military. In its precision, we all knew what was at stake. If this failed, Veronica would retaliate ruthlessly. We scheduled the drop for the morning of Elaine's Neighbor of the Year BBQ, a lavish, exclusive HOA event held annually at the community pool. We couldn't have asked for a better stage. The night before, we held one final meeting in my garage. Everyone reviewed their roles. The air was tense, but resolute, like a unit preparing for deployment. "Whatever happens tomorrow," I told them, "we've already won, just by standing up together." After the team left, Mia lingered behind. We sat on the back deck watching the stars. The atmosphere between us had shifted. Anticipation hung in the air, but so did something deeper. "You know," she said softly, "6 months ago, I would have thought this plan was insane. I never would have joined something like this." I nodded, understanding more than I let on. "What changed?" She looked at me for a long moment before answering. "I realize some things are worth fighting for, and some people are worth fighting alongside." That night, before she left, we shared our first kiss. It started tentative, unsure, but settled into something steady and certain. Whatever happened tomorrow, the world had already changed. Just after midnight, my phone buzzed. WDE. "I hope you're not planning anything stupid," he said, voice low and suspicious. "Of course not," I replied calmly. "Just prepping for a long fishing trip, nothing major." He hung up, unconvinced. I smiled. By dawn, Whispering Pines Estates would have a new resident in the community pool. Operation Yacht Drop began at 5 a.m. sharp. Victor rolled in with the specially outfitted trailer. Tony's client's yacht, now renamed Elaine's Nightmare in slick vinyl lettering, sat gleaming atop the platform. Mia had added a small tagline beneath the name, "A gift from your grateful neighbors." Security didn't intervene. They were too stunned to react. We moved quickly, maneuvering the yacht toward the pool like a coordinated pit crew. We hit one snag. The trailer got stuck at the pool gate. Walter stepped in smoothly, clipboard in hand. "Pre-approved pool maintenance," he explained to the curious onlookers. All according to plan. By 6:30 a.m., Elaine's Nightmare floated in the community pool, taking up nearly the entire space. Mia and I decorated it with banners reading, 100% HOA compliant, and pasted laminated HOA financial records with suspicious transactions highlighted in red. Lily's annotated map stood at the front. Nowhere does it say no boats in pool. We set up a refreshment station with donuts, coffee, and a PA system that connected to a mic on the yacht's deck. Walter positioned himself at the clubhouse with a video camera. Gerald wandered the grounds with his DSLR, capturing every angle. By 7:30, we were in position. I stood proudly on the yacht's bow, waiting for the curtain to rise. UDE was the first to arrive, there to help prep for the BBQ. When he saw the yacht, his jaw dropped. He fumbled for his phone. "You can't, I'm calling a tow truck right now." But when his crew arrived, they refused. "Too big, boss," one said. "We touched that, it's a lawsuit waiting to happen." Enraged, WDE tried to climb aboard. He slipped. Splash. The entire crowd laughed as he surfaced, sputtering. By 8:45, Veronica finally arrived, clipboard in hand, ready to take charge. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. Her exclusive community BBQ hijacked by a yacht, a soaked and humiliated Wade, and over 30 residents sipping coffee, taking photos, and reading our posted documents. Her face cycled through confusion, recognition, then incandescent rage. She immediately called Douglas and the police. Douglas showed up moments later, already yelling, "You will remove that boat now. This is criminal trespassing." Standing on the deck, I lifted the mic. "Good morning, President. Westbrook. Perfect weather for a swim, don't you think? And by the way, your BBQ guests are arriving. I invited a few local reporters to cover this special event." Right on cue, Jennifer Park, a local TV reporter, arrived with her camera. "Crew." Veronica turned to Officer Daniels. "Arrest him. This is vandalism, trespassing. It violates at least 15 HOA regulations." Daniels shook his head, arms folded. "This is a civil matter, Miss Westbrook. I can't arrest someone for parking a boat in a swimming pool, especially if no laws were broken." As tensions rose, Gerald handed out printouts of bylaws. I quoted them over the mic. "There is no specific rule against placing watercraft in the pool," I read. "You enforce what's written, not what you wish were there." Wade, Douglas, and Veronica began shouting over one another. Reporters caught every second. Then I began reading financial documents over the loudspeaker. Questionable transactions, unusual transfers, discrepancies in meeting minutes. The crowd stopped laughing. They started listening, and the pressure on Veronica Westbrook began to boil. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Barbara Moore, long silent on the HOA board, stood up and publicly resigned on the spot. "I want no part in potentially illegal activity," she declared, her voice shaking but resolute. What followed was extraordinary. The same community that had lived under Veronica's thumb for years suddenly found its collective voice. One by one, residents who had been silent for too long began to speak. The Millers, a quiet couple, stepped forward first. They described how Veronica had fined them $3,000 because their son's basketball hoop was briefly visible from the street while he was home from college. Then the Johnsons recounted being threatened with legal action over planting non-approved rose varieties in their front yard. Mrs. Gonzalez, widowed and in her 70s, stood with tears in her eyes as she shared how Veronica had forced her to repaint her house 3 times in one summer, constantly changing her decision on which shade of beige was acceptable. The costs had depleted her fixed income savings. Walter and other former board members testified how they were pushed out for questioning Veronica's decisions. Then Laura Matthews, a neighborhood accountant, volunteered to audit the HOA's finances. Within hours, she'd already flagged over $75,000 in questionable transactions. Meanwhile, Wade's crew attempted to remove the yacht. But my security measures had rendered their equipment useless. Victor, arms crossed and smirking, glanced at Wade and said, "Looks like your tools aren't quite professional enough, are they?" Jennifer Park continued broadcasting live, drawing even more residents, some from nearby neighborhoods. The crowd swelled to over 100 people. The atmosphere shifted palpably. Years of pent-up frustration began transforming into solidarity. People, who had lived next to each other for years without exchanging more than a nod, were now sharing stories, phone numbers, and hugs. Neighbors formed impromptu groups to address real community needs, not fines but friendships. Lily, once timid, stepped forward with newfound fire. Bylaw 12, Section 4 states we can hold an emergency election with a quorum of 50% of homeowners, she declared. Few had even known that rule existed. Gerald confirmed it was legally binding. In minutes, the crowd created a sign-in sheet. Neighbors called others who weren't present, urging them to come. Within half an hour, we had representation from over 70% of Whispering Pines households. Veronica tried to threaten legal consequences, but no one listened. Her power had vanished. Laura presented preliminary evidence of $75,000 in improper spending. The vote happened right there, beside the HOA's precious pool. Elaine, Douglas, and Wade were removed from the board by 95% majority. Wade, red-faced, shouted, "I'll sue this entire neighborhood." Jennifer raised her mic. "Would you care to explain your inflated towing invoices on live TV?" He went silent. As the crowd erupted in cheers, I turned to Veronica. Calmly, I said, "Perhaps it's time you found somewhere else to live. But before you go, we need to talk about why I'm 50 and the damage to freedom." That moment tasted sweeter than revenge. It tasted like justice. The yacht incident, as it came to be known, marked a dramatic turning point. The very next day, the change was visible. Neighbors who used to hurry indoors now stopped to chat. Front porches, once kept empty out of fear, were now filled with families sipping iced tea and sharing stories. Within a week, spontaneous block parties, community gardens, and volunteer programs sprang to life. A committee formed to help elderly residents with yard maintenance. Strangers became neighbors. Neighbors became friends. Children played in the streets again. Parents no longer worried about HOA patrol cars lurking nearby. One family even set up a lemonade stand, something Veronica had previously outlawed as commercial activity. But the best was still to come. Laura, along with an independent auditing firm, conducted a full investigation. The results were damning. Veronica and Douglas had misappropriated over $120,000 over 5 years. Wade was found guilty of business fraud and lost his towing license. All 3 faced serious legal consequences. Veronica lost not only her board seat, but also her home. She received 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and was publicly disgraced. Local news reported that her lavish lifestyle had been funded almost entirely by misappropriated HOA dues. Douglas lost his retirement savings paying fines and restitution. He moved to a small apartment 2 towns over. Wade, abandoned by his 3rd wife, was last seen working as a parking lot attendant. As for me, I got my $1,150 back, plus $5,000 in damages for the vandalism to freedom and for my father's stolen fishing lures, which were mysteriously found in WDE's office. But the real reward wasn't money. The real victory was what the community became. An emergency election brought in an entirely new HOA board, people who had once been ignored or dismissed. Mia was elected Vice President of Landscaping and Environmental Policies. The new board established term limits, transparent finances, competitive bidding, community-approved rule changes, They reduced HOA fees by 40% while improving services, simply by cutting out waste and corruption. Their first official act? A community input day. Ideas flowed. A garden in the unused commons behind the clubhouse. A mentorship program pairing retirees with local teens. Seasonal festivals to celebrate the diversity of Whispering Pines. It was electric. People who had never spoken at meetings were now proposing initiatives and leading projects. Walter said it reminded him of what the neighborhood had been 20 years ago, before rules mattered more than relationships. Soon, the changes became visible. Yards bloomed, with color and personality. Mary Wilson's cottage garden of native plants. The Rodriguez kids' rock sculpture garden. Mr. Peterson's intricate bonsai display, and freedom. She finally got a home, my garage, no more threats. The new board even passed guidelines allowing moderate watercraft storage with resident input. In fact, Whispering Pines' new boat policy became a model for other HOAs. The culture had shifted completely. Instead of threats and fines, we worked together. Neighbors shared tools, hosted BBQs, helped one another without being asked. A retired contractor started free home repair classes in his garage. A few teachers began tutoring neighborhood kids. 3 families even tore down their backyard fences to build a shared garden, with a communal pizza oven. We hosted a poolside BBQ, no yacht this time, open to everyone. Even neighboring communities came to learn how we had turned things around For Mia and me, we kept fishing. 6 months after Operation Yacht Drop, I proposed to her on Freedom. I tied one of my father's old lures to a special line and dropped it in the water. She cried. I cried. For the first time in years, I felt at peace, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Walter said it best. It's like Whispering Pines remembered how to be a neighborhood again. And perhaps the most touching moment came one rainy afternoon. Mrs. Gonzalez's basement flooded. Once she would have suffered alone. Instead, one text brought 15 neighbors to her home within minutes, some with wet vacs, others with towels, a few with hot food for the crew. The problem was solved in hours, not by an HOA mandate, but by a community that had rediscovered its heart.